But let's transition a little bit to the Super Bowl, talk about another job well done. The Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, we talked about this O-line, D-line matchup, going into the game. We had 2 weeks to discuss it. Everyone, myself included, thought, it favored Philly just a little bit. I was more in the just a little bit than maybe some other people in the media who were very aggressively saying that this was one of the bigger mismatches we've seen. And the Chiefs O-line, I mean, they balled out. I know the field conditions were maybe a little bit part of that, but in terms of the field conditions, I want to kind of address that right away. So you and I, when we played, I learned this from you. I rooted for any sort of weather that meant the field would be terrible. So my perfect game would have been torrential downpour, soaked field, no footing at all. That was what I rooted for every single game. I didn't care about our offense. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted to make sure I had the easiest job possible. Right. So we do know as linemen that a slippery field tends to favor the offensive line. Takes a little bit of the sting out what the defensive line can do. But I do want to point out, in all the clips I've seen and watching the game and seeing what's going around on social media, Eagles slipping were while they were being blocked. It wasn't like, oh, I got the corner and I'm going to get to the quarterback and now I slipped. Like, the Chiefs offensive line wasn't slipping. We're also in good position. They had good bases under them. So I do understand that, especially for, a speed guy like Reddick, who we talked about in the 2 weeks leading up to it. But I do think that the offensive line blocked really well, and they were always in position that when the guy slipped, they basically just fell on top of them because the block was already won. It was just, that little bit of slip at the end of the play. So I did want to talk about that a little bit, and curious if you had any thoughts, watching it live and seeing some clips in the last couple of days.
My first coach in the NFL was Romeo Crennel, who came from Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells. And the famous quote he would always say is when you'd slip on film, he would say, "Get shoes that work." Because that's exactly what he meant. Get shoes that'll put your feet in the ground where you don't slip. And whatever it takes, it's on you. You can't just continue to slip and then blame somebody else, because in the end, all that is doing is you're hurting your team. Like, guys that understand how to play with their feet underneath them, in balance, in control, with the right cleats, have no problems whatsoever, and then it becomes their advantage. But the guys that want to build excuses for themselves or don't practice in the right cleats in pregame warmups, don't give enough effort and get into realistic game situations with their body positions with the cleats that they're going to wear in the game, and then all of a sudden they get surprised when they slip in the game. I don't have any sympathy for them, because that's all part of it. The playing conditions are the same for both teams, and the people that are the most well prepared, just like with scheme, just like with how you practice and you set up the predictions of what the defense and the offense is going to do to you. And it's all about that. Preparation leads to success. And it was pretty clear that the Chiefs were more prepared for the field conditions than the Eagles.
Yeah, I've got a nice little stat for you I saw on Twitter. So Mr. Ollie Connolly charted what he would call slip/Sodgate. He said the Eagles defense had a player slip on 38% of Patrick Mahomes' dropbacks. 5 times they had multiple slippages. The Chiefs defense had a player slip on only 14% of Jalen Hurts' dropbacks with no multiples. And to your point, I don't think that it means that Kansas City is just a lot better athletes than Philly. I know from being in Kansas City, we talk about field conditions all week. If we're going to a place and it's either going to rain or it's grass that we know isn't great, they talk about it all week. You better be in the right shoes. You better be in the right shoes. The head coach, Coach Reid, talks about it. The equipment staff is constantly monitoring. I used to go up to them 5 times before I had to make a decision on what shoes to wear, because I was a guy, I migrated into not going out, pre-game and not testing the field and warming up. I kind of did my own warm-up inside and then just went out into the normal team warm-up. And so I would rely on the equipment guys that say, hey, how's the field doing? And out there, they'd put on cleats, they'd run around, like they tested. So my position coach, Andy Heck, we'd be watching film, and it's not okay if you slip. Like, he would get frustrated and say, you need to wear the right shoes. So it's an organizational philosophy to be in the right equipment. And, footwear is maybe the most important piece of equipment that nobody talks about, because if it can, theoretically decide a Super Bowl or have such a major impact on the Super Bowl, you have to be in what's correct. And so based on those stats, I would say, Kansas City either mentally or, physically took that responsibility to heart and seemed to do a better job of it.
This is where the experience of Andy Reid makes a big impact on the outcome of the game. And we talked about, his experience in Super Bowls and big games and how many years he's been as a head coach. It leads him to be a great communicator and a great predictor of what are the things that possibly could play an impact in this game, and to make sure that he's communicating down through the proper channels to the people that need to get it, so that all of his players are prepared for all possible outcomes. And understanding the field conditions in Arizona, like we all did going into it, we knew it was going to be a little bit slippery, and making sure that his equipment staff was communicating with the players to make sure that everybody had the right shoes, so that when you slipped or you didn't slip, it was not an issue of the shoes or a surprise of where my foot placement needs to be on any given play. And it reminds me of during this season when a person was hired to be a head coach that had no experience as a coach. And the people that wanted to defend him were either his buddies from his team that he played on, or these bozos in the media that say, it's not that hard to be a head coach. It's easy. What do? You don't do that many things. It's because you don't fucking know anything about what it takes to be an NFL player or an NFL coach. You've never been in that locker room, and you don't understand the number of things that you have to think about and that you have to coordinate and communicate with your staff to make sure that your team is prepared. Certainly, you can accidentally win a few games, but to be consistently great, to be consistently good like Andy Reid is, you've got to be extremely detailed and prepared for all outcomes, and you got to be able to communicate on all levels of your franchise to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and understanding that potentially the field conditions are going to play a factor, and to make sure that you get ahead of it with your equipment staff and the communication that they have with the players to make sure that the players in the right cleats could have been the difference in this Super Bowl. Easily, you can easily make that argument. And that goes right back to Andy Reid and the job that he does as a head coach, using and leaning on his experience of 20 plus years as a head coach and 3 Super Bowls now.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of shout this out that, we're talking about the game and we still haven't really gotten into the actual offensive line play or the matchups. We've spent 10 minutes on field conditions, but no, it's that important. Like, these are the little things that are really important in a game situation. And my mind goes back to the first Hard Knocks, which was the Baltimore Ravens. And I think the first scene is Brian Billick talking to the groundskeeper about what the practice is. A guy like Billick, who's an experienced head coach, he understands, like, the field conditions have to be great. They're about to start training camp. Back then, there were plenty of two-a-days, and you don't want guys getting injured. You don't want to risk your season because the field is not in the right condition. So let's transition into talking about the actual Super Bowl now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk about the Super Bowl. Philly, they came in and it seemed like they had a huge advantage, because the Chiefs' offensive line is solid, but they're not as good as the Eagles' offensive line. And the Eagles' pass rush is probably the best in the NFL. They had 4 players that had more than 10 sacks this season, including Hassan Reddick, who I think, if you include the playoffs, was right around 20. And the matchup with him and Andrew Wiley was one that everybody was going to watch, especially because Andrew Wiley didn't play great a couple years ago in the Super Bowl, gave up a bunch of pressures. And it seemed like on paper that was a mismatch, but the Chiefs' offensive line played amazing. They didn't allow very many pressures or hits. They allowed banged up Patrick Mahomes plenty of time to be able to operate back there, and especially Andrew Wiley. I think you should mention, what did you see between Andrew Wiley and Hassan Reddick in that matchup that allowed Andrew Wiley to play as well as he did, allowing only 1 pressure in that game?
Well, you could tell, I could tell, at least knowing Wiley, he came into that game pretty fired up and wanted to prove something. And he's a guy that he's an emotional player. And so he gets, really invested into it. And, if you're getting called out basically for 2 weeks and all you hear about is Hassan Reddick, and the matchup is, oh, that guy's got an advantage over the Chiefs tackle and especially over Wiley, you take that to heart and you want to come out and you want to prove something. And that's what I saw. And, Coach Reid helps with the tackles, with the offensive line as much as anybody I've ever been around. He helped me a bunch. My career was definitely helped because I had him. And again, the help isn't necessarily that a guy's hitting your defensive end every play. But if you go and you look at the first drive or 2 of the game, there's so many things that Reddick gets influenced by. They have the tight end blocking him, then he sheds him, they run a screen. The next play, they're running, a normal play action. The one we talked about with San Francisco, and the backup tight end is blocking Hassan Reddick. But the play before before, he got blocked and then he got shed and he got screened. So now Reddick's maybe thinking a little bit, they're going to run another screen. Is someone going to come help? They run quick game, they run jet sweeps, they run, normal runs. You do everything you can to influence that defensive end, to make him think, to make him reactionary and not the aggressor. And you're able to slow him down just a little bit. But on top of that, just the one-on-one matchups. I mean, Wiley won every one-on-one matchup. And probably the biggest downside to Wiley's game is every now and again when he throws his outside arm, as an offensive tackle, you want to kind of have that elbow tucked underneath. You don't want to ever let that elbow go out. And Wiley tends to kind of let the elbow go out and rotate the thumb down when he punches. And for your outside arm, that's deadly, because that means you're in a bad position to get that arm chopped. You kind of get your hip locked. The hip and the elbow are tied together. And part of that is sometimes due to undersetting a little bit. The Chiefs' philosophy is don't get beat inside, be firm at the tackle. It's okay to run him around the pocket if you've got the right depth. And so you can at times lead to undersetting just a hair, because it feels like, hey, I got to stay inside. And then when you're undersetting and you go to throw that punch and your elbow goes down, you punch him on the inside half, he's able to swipe your arm, get the corner. So most of the time when Wiley gets beat, that's what happens. Then he overcompensates a little bit and the guy spins inside. It becomes this little bit of a cycle. Well, his set points were perfect. He was always in the right spot. He was throwing his hands. He was being confident with it. He was getting to that outside half of the rusher. He wasn't letting the elbow go out. And so coach helped a lot. Mahomes helps because he gets rid of the ball so quickly. But there were a lot of one-on-one matchups, and Wiley won every single one of those. And again, there were times that Reddick slipped. It was slippage after he was already blocked, and Wiley had the rep one, and then Wiley has a couple pretty awesome finishes on top of that. So it was just a lot of fun to see, because, based on some stats, I think PFF has him and Orlando Brown as like the two tackles with the highest pressures given up this year. If you go and you look at ESPN's advanced data, they actually have Wiley as the 6th best offensive tackle in terms of pass block win rate. And they have the Chiefs. I looked at this. This is, I think, kind of crazy. They have the Chiefs as the number 1 pass blocking offensive line in the NFL. And now I think that's due in part to Mahomes. It's due to Coach Reid. I wouldn't say that if you think about them, they're definitely one of the top pass blocking lines, but I wouldn't say that they're number 1. And they're number 1 by like 8%. It's some pretty crazy margin. So I think they get boosted a little bit by ESPN and they get downgraded a little too much by PFF. But Wiley is just a really good player, and he's had some matchups where he's gotten beat, and he's gotten beat by Max Crosby and Von Miller. And, these guys who are the best rushers in the NFL. Like, you're going to face good players. It's okay to get beat every now and again. I did too. You didn't. You're in the Hall of Fame because you didn't get beat, but I got beat every now and again like a normal guy. So it was really fun for me to see a guy that I played with, a guy that I care for, who I think gotten some bad publicity and unwarranted publicity, to go out and to perform the way he did on the biggest stage, and to do it down after down after down. There wasn't a slippage in play. He started to get that confidence and got like super Wiley, where he puffs his chest out. Just a lot of fun for me to watch.
Yeah, I was really happy for him. We had him in Cleveland for a little while before he was Andrew Wiley, the Super Bowl champion. But he was a great dude. He was a great teammate. So I'm really happy for him. But Jonathan Gannon, the Eagles defensive coordinator, he decided not to really blitz all that much. I think he only had 14 called blitzes in the game, and they didn't stunt a whole lot up front, only 5 stunts. And I'm curious, from your perspective, why do you think the Eagles decided to just kind of basically rush their dudes in their lanes and not really send any additional rushers in this game, and why that didn't change as the game went on, when it seemed to be that they weren't able to get home in the first half by just rushing 4 or 5 guys?
So this is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I tweeted it during the game. I tweeted it after the game. To me, the biggest factor was that the Chiefs were not in 3rd and long. They had 8 third downs on the entire game, and they only had 3 over 4 yards. I think they had 3rd and 8, 3rd and 8, and a 3rd and 15. So they weren't in situations where the defense gets to dictate what they want to do. And so my guess is, game plan wise, they looked at the Chiefs and they said, all right, they run the ball a little bit, they do some RPOs, and on 1st and 2nd down, they either take shot plays or they mostly throw underneath and intermediate. And stunts and twists aren't really designed to get pressure quick. So if you are running stunts and twists on 1st and 2nd down, you're potentially running your guys out of gaps in the run game. And in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback, you're not necessarily getting quick pressure. And so you look at, again, the Chiefs offense, Mahomes, the way he gets rid of it. You think to yourself, we've got good guys. We're going to get home quicker if they rush 1-on-1 and they beat their guys. And so the couple third downs, especially in the first half, that the Eagles did get into 3rd and 8+, they got home. Guys beat, the Chiefs linemen, and they were running 5-man games and twists and stuff. And you saw the Chiefs kind of stumbling over themselves. A couple, there's one in particular I can remember, a 3-man game in the middle that Reddick loops around, and Creed Humphrey gets lost in the wash, and he gets tripped and he falls, and Reddick is getting a hit on Pat as I think Sweat is getting around the corner and getting a hit on Pat as well. So they were effective at the 3rd down rush, which is why they were so effective this season, because they got leads. The offense, as we talked about a bunch, is so good at being able to get out, control the tempo, control the flow of the game, score points. And the defense had been better throughout the year at forcing long 3rd downs where they could pin their ears back. They could blitz. They can run exotic pressure packages. They can get 5 rushers on the field. They can do all the fun stuff. Kansas City was just so effective on 1st and 2nd down that the Eagles weren't able to get in those situations. And to your point, why didn't they mix it up after the fact? I didn't really see anything schematically that it seemed like they should have done differently up front. Again, maybe you try to run a couple line twists or some stunts and you try to slow the guys down. To me, that would be more in the run game. I always hated going against a team that ran a lot of lateral movement in the run game. You tend to hesitate a little bit. You're not sure which way a guy's going to go. But I don't think it would have affected the pass game. And I think the Chiefs were on point with, their assignments, number one, but also the physical part of actually blocking the Eagles.
Yeah, when teams run a lot of stunts in games, to me, it's more about slowing down the run game and slowing down the draw game specifically, try to muddy things up. And it really just slows down their ability to get home to the quarterback. And that was something that I loved when I was an offensive lineman and we went against a team that was going to run a lot of stunts in games. I was like, great. That means I don't have to block them one-on-one and they're just going to run into each other most of the time. So that really wasn't too much of a surprise from my perspective. And I felt like they probably didn't want to blitz because they obviously didn't want to leave some of the studs from the Chiefs one-on-one. And I thought they were going to try to double Kelsey in the middle and then just rush and then just try to see if they could collapse the pocket around Mahomes and play tight. And for the most part, I mean, it was fairly effective. I think people are going to say, oh, that wasn't the great strategy, but I think any other strategy wouldn't have worked better. It would have worked worse. And they would have given up way more yardage and points to the Chiefs in a game that really kind of came down to the wire and a bad-ish call by the refs. And that's where I want to bring you next. So right at the end of the game, Chiefs.
Wait, I want to say real quick. Okay, to further your point that maybe it wasn't as bad. Some of the advanced data says that, like, I think based on DVOA, maybe this was the 6th best offensive game all season from any team. Because when you look at Kansas City's performance against Philadelphia's defense, which is number 1, you get the boost for the opponent. The other way to think of it potentially is, all right, the Chiefs got 7 points off the turnover, so 38 goes to 31. Kadarius Toney also put them at like the 10-yard line. So realistically, that's free points right there. So if you think about it in that way, the defense gave up more like 24 points in terms of the normal flow of the game. Yeah. Which if you think of it, hey, we're only going to give up 24 like legitimate points to the Kansas City offense. You would say as an Eagles fan, like, yeah, I'd feel pretty good about it that I like my odds to win the game. Right. So we can go to the referees and the calls, but I do want to make that point because it is a good one that you made.
Yeah, I think it's good because as fans, you always want to look back on the result and you want to result everything, or what do they call it, resulting, and say, well, we lost, we gave up too many points. But when you break it down and you say, well, if we would have taken a different strategy, it doesn't necessarily mean it would have been a better outcome. As a matter of fact, the strategy we had kept the Chiefs fairly limited when you consider the point total that they could have scored with the amount of weapons and with Patrick Mahomes back there. But I want to get your take on that. One of the last plays of the game that kind of sealed it for the Chiefs. They're driving down the field. All they need is a field goal. And they get, I don't know, was it 3rd down, but they're in the red zone.
3rd and 8, 20-ish yard line.
Right in that fringe area, red zone area. And they throw a pass down their left sideline and the ref throws a flag. I think he threw a holding. So it's an automatic 1st down. So then basically all the Chiefs have to do is run the clock down to almost 0, 3 to 5 seconds, kick a field goal, and then the Eagles have almost no time left. Great situationally sound football by the Chiefs. Mm-hmm. They ran a run play, around the left end, and the Eagles were, to their credit, were trying to let them score, which is what you want to do in that situation on defense. And they also did a good job of kind of making it seem like they were going to try to tackle the Chiefs offensive player, to maybe try to fake him out a little bit, where he thinks like, hey, they're going to try to tackle me, so I need to I forget where I am on the field and what I'm trying to do, which is get close to the end zone but get down. But credit to the Chiefs receiver. I think it was like a jet sweep that they ran in that play.
It was a running back. It was McKinnon.
Okay, it was McKinnon, and he slides short of the goal line, and basically they win the game because of those two situations. And so I'm curious from your perspective what you saw watching that play, because I was up in a suite, so it was really hard to get like a good view of exactly what happened. Do you think there was enough contact in that situation to be able to throw that flag?
So watching on TV, the first replay they showed was after the tug. So all you really see is a DB that's not even really handsy. After the tug, he had pretty good coverage. And so I tweeted at the time, like, that can't be it. There's no way they threw the flag. Like, that's not a penalty at all. So you go back and you see a couple different angles, and you do see a tug. You see, I think it was Juju, the receiver, gets slowed up just a little bit. To me, the biggest thing is after the game, the defensive back admitted that he did tug him, and he was hopeful that the flag wasn't thrown, which you don't see guys admitting to penalties very often, let alone in a high leverage situation like that. So a tug did occur. The question is it material enough to throw the flag in that situation? I'm a guy that's not a situation penalty guy. A flag's a flag. If he did that in the first quarter, it should have been a flag. Juju did get tugged in the first quarter, and a flag wasn't thrown. So for the people that like to play the even out the bad calls game, it did even out. It just one was in the biggest moment of the game, and one was in the first quarter. An analogy I've seen floating around that I kind of agree with is, it felt like going 65 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone, and we're usually allowed to go 65 in a 60-mile-an-hour zone, and so you don't usually see the ticket come out for that. So in this situation, it kind of felt like they had been letting them mostly play all day. The game had been, run without too many flags. There were no holding calls, going into the game, especially from the Chiefs' perspective. A lot of Carl Cheffers talk because the Chiefs have had a quite storied history with him. They made his voice crack at the end of the first half in the game against the Raiders earlier this year by basically, bullying him by booing after some bad calls. And so the Chiefs fans were, really nervous about this one. I think it was pretty well officiated. I can go either way on this call. There definitely was a tug. You can see it visually. You can screenshot it. There's the jersey removed. The fact that the defensive back admitted it after the fact and that he felt like he did enough that might have warranted a flag sealed it for me that it was a good call, because you and I both have blocked a guy, long run, kind of peek back after the play and make sure that there's no flag on the ground. And I held him, but hopefully they don't call this one. It wasn't a huge one. That's what it felt like. I held him. Hopefully it wasn't a huge one. And they did call it. So I think based on the rule, based on, defensive holding, the fact that there was a little bit of a momentum shift by getting tugged, I do think that was the right call. The fact that the defensive back after the fact admitted to it also kind of lent some closure on it. But we don't live in that kind of era, and people are going to complain about it for the rest of the time. Yeah. And this discussion, unfortunately, is not going to have any closure.
Yeah, I really can't add too much to what you said about that, because I agree with everything. I think there was enough of a tug to say that he restricted the receiver's path in the pattern, in the route, to warrant a flag. But I also can say that it is true that we were robbed of a potential incredible finish. Like, we can feel upset about that while also saying it was probably a good call. And I think that's one of the things that social media doesn't do a very good job of, is people can be really pissed that we didn't get to see an incredible finish and we got a boring, like, basically kneel, kick a field goal, game is over finish, which nobody likes to see in a Super Bowl. That, potentially, had that penalty not been called, could have been an unbelievable finish with Jalen Hurts coming down the field and, having that coming of age moment where he becomes a legend in NFL history. But that doesn't mean that you should officiate every end of game situation to try to find an outcome that becomes more dramatic. Because one, that's just bad practice to just always say, well, we're always just going to officiate it to make sure that it's a close game in the end. Imagine how pissed off the gamblers would be in that situation if the NFL officials were always knowingly or unknowingly officiating a game to get a better ending. And let's just assume that was the case. If every time a game was close, the officials either swallowed their whistle or threw a flag and called a penalty in a situation to make the game better at the end, then it would water down the times when you actually do get that true amazing ending. Like, think about some of the great endings we've had in Super Bowls, with the helmet catch and the different incredible finishes. Like, it wouldn't feel so awesome and amazing when you did have those finishes if they were artificially provided because of the way the officials reffed games intentionally at the end. So I'm with you. I think the game should be officiated the same way from start to finish, and we just need to enjoy those times when you do get those great finishes, when we get them, and the game naturally unfolds in that manner, rather than forcing it by saying, well, at the end of a big game, you just got to swallow your whistle, or vice versa, and throw the flag to make sure that we are provided as NFL fans with the finish that we all wanted.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good way to close up this episode. It was an exciting week, for me as a Chiefs fan, even more exciting for you as an official Hall of Famer. So congrats again. We'll see you all next week on the Grumpy Old Lineman.